Hey everyone. Thanks for joining us today for part two of our webinar series on integrations, or as I like to call it, the next episode. Hold up. Before we get started, make sure that if you have questions that you're asking them to that panel on your right-hand side, there's a little Q&A button. You can click there, type in your question, and also you can upvote other people's questions. That lets us know when appropriate, when it's time to answer your questions, which ones we will. So if you see one that is similar to what you want to ask, go ahead and upvote that one instead of asking a new one. Also in the um, chat, if you're saying hello to folks, we'll also put some information there throughout the webinar. For example, links to sign up for other webinars later on in our presentation. And we'll also put a link to catch part one of our webinar there shortly. And of course, at the end, we're going to deploy a feedback survey. And really, that's the only way that we get better, right? And that's the only way we know what type of content's important to you. So if you would, at the end, please fill out that feedback survey. You'll see a little prompt towards the end when it's time. All right, so today is part two, and we're talking about achieving more with your event data integration. So we're really going to double click into three specific integrations that Cvent holds with three other target systems: HubSpot, Marketo, and Salesforce. By the end of today's webinar, I hope that you'll be comfortable with how and why Cvent event and attendee data is absolutely in need to be in those other systems, understanding the configuration and the business rules around each one of those integrations. So if you're a system administrator out there, you sort of understand what the rules of the integration are. And we'll also give you some practical planning steps to get an integration with one of these systems up off the ground. I do want to mention that it's not just going to be me up on stage today. I'll be joined by some of my esteemed colleagues that also work with integrations here. So if you haven't met me before, my name is Ryan Costa. I'm a product lead for integrations. I'll also be joined by my colleague, Jeremy Solar, who is a senior solutions consultant that may have worked with some of you all in some of those pre-sale qualification type calls. And then also joined by Daniel Godin, who is a manager on our technical consulting team, who really helps our customers deep dive into their specific needs and build that sort of integration ecosystem that's required. So before we get into each of these particular integrations, HubSpot, Marketo, and Salesforce, I want to do a quick recap of what happened in webinar one of this particular series. If you haven't seen it, I hope one of my colleagues out there has posted the link out into the chat, but you can click on that at a later time, obviously not now. But watch what happened in episode one, if you will. Give you a quick recap. So we sort of talked about sort of the confusing world of integrations, right? What needs to be connected to what? What's the lead system? What are the rules that we need to follow with building integrations? It's kind of a misty, hazy sort of understanding of what needs to be connected to what and how that works. And we really aimed in webinar one to talk about what's that path forward, right? And what's the clear skies ahead of being able to build that particular integration. So we talked about some of the different stakeholders that you'll need to be part of your integrations conversations if this is all sort of new to you. So we things like your IT and security and compliance folks, your marketing operations, sales operations, of course, your marketing producers, right? Those are, I'm sorry, your event producers, who are some of our traditional sort of personas that Cvent has catered to over the years, right? How to get all those people in the room and talk about what's important to each and make sure we're achieving those within integration. We broke those up into use cases, and we'll follow those same use cases today, talking about simple integrations all the way to very complex integrations. And of course, at the end of webinar one, I gave you a little bit more on how you can get started sort of in that crawl, walk, run. We have some partnerships with some iPaaS systems where you can test and play around with integrations immediately and allow you to get up off the ground and see data syncing, as well as talking about further steps if you want to have more complex integration discussions. So before we get started with those deep dives today, want to get a sense of what everybody's here to learn about, right? I mentioned, and it was sort of put in our marketing content for this webinar that we're going to be talking about 3 specific solutions: HubSpot, Marketo, and Salesforce. So if you would, on the right-hand side, click on that polling tab. And if you could please give us a response and let us know which particular integration you are interested in learning most about today. I'll give you a minute to vote on that. And while that's happening, I'm going to actually hand it off to my colleague, Jeremy, to take us through our first integration.
Awesome. Appreciate everybody joining us this morning. As Ryan had mentioned, my name is Jeremy Solar. I'm a senior solutions consultant over here at Cvent. I've been with the company for a little over 4 years, and I'm currently based out of the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Today, I'm going to be walking through and talking about our Cvent HubSpot connector. Now, historically, the main issue that the connector is really looking to solve is to provide more of a streamlined process to combat that time-intensive, headache-laden process of exporting and importing a lot of this event data that is tied back to contacts and leads into the systems that we're actually working with. So this, in the spirit of kind of demystifying some of these integrations, a point that Ryan likes to bring up a lot, the HubSpot connector was built with simplicity and straightforwardness in mind, just to ensure that this integration be made more approachable for end users. Now, released earlier this year, the integration looks primarily at pushing over event registration and event participation over from Cvent to HubSpot. Once a lot of this information gets pushed over from Cvent, it is going to be written initially to the marketing events object within HubSpot. So for those who might not be super familiar with that object, the marketing events object is going to allow you all to write that event data in a much more simplified way. So it's going to ensure that we don't actually need to create any custom objects within the HubSpot interface. Now, how do we actually get to the marketing events object? So as you all can see right now, we're living in the contact area of the marketing automation solution. Marketing events is going to live within this contact drop-down area. The really neat thing about the HubSpot connector is that once the integration is turned on, should we create an event within Cvent, that will automatically create a marketing event within the HubSpot interface, saving you all a lot of time. Now, a marketing event is going to host all the most important high-level information needed, like event title, event description, organizer, event type, as well as some important start and end date information. Now, in addition to that event information, it's also going to show us very high-level trends. How is our event ultimately performing? How many people do we have registered for the event? How many people attended? And also how many people canceled? In addition to some of those high-level statistics, the marketing events object is also very helpful for better marketing and pipeline attribution. Marketing events can be tied to campaigns as well as lists. As we're looking to dig a little bit deeper, maybe we're looking to see individuals that are actually participating with our event program, we will be able to see a lot of this data at the contact level as well. Right now, I'm on Jared Fitch's contact. I might be a sales rep or just a HubSpot user that's looking to learn a little bit more about Jared has been interacting with our organization. Here via the activity timeline, I can see a lot of that data. I can see that he has registered for one of our more recent webinars on February 3rd. I can also see that he has attended. So not only has he shown interest, but he's also committed to participating and digesting a lot of the content. This can be very helpful for a sales rep to create that touch point, reach out to Jared, and ultimately ask whether or not there is any needed follow-up. Do we need to potentially push further conversations down the funnel? Now, if we're looking to create more of a segmented approach, I want to see X number of individuals that attended or X number of individuals that ultimately canceled or registered. That's where we can leverage lists. So further being able to find more of a gem in terms of that cross spread of information for us to potentially further any marketing efforts. Now, lists are ultimately going to use those activities that we're pushing over: attendance, registration, and cancellation. For a cancellation list, I might want to run one of these lists so that I can see if there are trends in terms of scheduling conflicts or other barriers to entry, right? Is there a common denominator why all of these individuals ultimately canceled their registration and wasn't able to attend the event? In creating these lists, I can use various filters, much like we can with lists automatically. What is ultimately going to be more specific to the HubSpot integration is us continuing to use this marketing event as the driver, along with the activity in question. So in this case, this list has been created to show only those that canceled their marketing event registration, specifically for that webinar that we were talking about a little bit earlier on. Now, if you all want to add additional criteria here, additional filters, you absolutely can. So just dependent on how much we want to mine into this information, you all can do so, depending on whatever segment we're really looking to create, whether or not we add maybe region to this list or areas of experience, maybe phone numbers, or how hot a lead specifically is. Maybe we even want to add more events here, right? I want to see people who are entirely committed into the entire event program, or at least resonating with content that is going to push forward some of our sales or marketing efforts. Now, any type of automation that we're looking to push downstream can be handled via workflows. So because we are able to write a lot of this information over to lists, we're then able to use workflows to our benefit to create some more of those streamlined processes internally. If we created a list for people that actually attended, right, people who are really committed to the content, are resonating with it, we might want to send them an email thanking them for their attendance. Or I might want to create a task for a sales rep to reach out to that individual to get feedback. What were their thoughts on that most recent webinar, and do we need to maybe schedule a follow-up call to dig deeper into the content that was actually covered, whether that was a product or a service, or if we do need to address anything related to that contact or the greater account in question. So a lot that we can do here with workflows, whether that is enrolling people in sequences, campaigns, sending out emails. The opportunities here are relatively limitless. Now, we spent a lot of time thus far living within the HubSpot ecosystem. I want to take some time so that we can dig a little bit deeper under the hood and show you all what configuration actually looks like within the back office system of Cvent. So we'll go ahead and navigate there. Now, in setting up the integration, we're primarily going to live within the admin area of the back office, specifically within push API integrations. Now, considering that this is meant to be one of those more simplistic integrations, the configuration and setup experience really exudes that. So as I'm looking to connect with HubSpot, I'll actually go ahead and re-log in over here. As I go ahead and look to connect with HubSpot, it's automatically pushing me to the HubSpot interface. If you all have multiple different instances set up, there will be the question of which one we actually want to connect to. In this case, I want to connect to SC Team Demo. Once I choose that account, I'll go ahead, agree, and now I'm successfully connected in a matter of steps. We don't need to go through an arduous configuration process. This is very intuitive. In addition to actually setting up that connection, I have some additional preferences here as well. So one way in which we can save some time is having the integration automatically turned on for all new events that we create within the system. This will help ensure that no data, no contact or lead pieces of information are falling through the cracks. Now, I will mention for clients and prospects that are potentially looking to host their entire total events program in the back end of Cvent, this might not always be the best thing to turn on, as we don't want to necessarily push our internal events into our marketing automation solution. In addition to connection and some of those other preferences, this is also where we'll be able to see that default list of field mapping, that default list of integration points and activities, just so that you all can get a better understanding on what information and activities can actually write over. Now, we've thought about these fields and integration points so that you all don't have to, right? We're looking to demystify these integrations. We're looking for this one to be more simplistic, more straightforward. Otherwise, this is very representative of the current state of the HubSpot connector with Cvent. This is out of the box and can be set up in really a matter of minutes. For those of you that might be deeper in terms of your interest for the HubSpot connector, definitely reach out to anyone at Cvent in terms of who your point of contact is. But with that being said, let's dig into a question that I see that we actually got from our audience. So for HubSpot, does this work with Cvent webinars and regular larger events? Really good question. This does work for Cvent webinars as it does for just general core event management and core Cvent registration. So really helpful in terms of, again, bringing our total events program into HubSpot so that you all can get a better understanding on holistically how our contacts and leads are interacting with all the content that we're throwing out there. Right now, I would say that the HubSpot connector is really a great fit for more simple, smaller events in nature. When it comes to, let's say, larger conferences, again, we are able to push over who's attended, who's registered, or who's canceled at the event level. It's just going to be dependent on what information you all are looking to push over via the integration. So obviously something we can dig a little bit deeper into on, a client demonstration with your account manager or Cvent representative. But to answer it very clearly, the HubSpot connector does work with both Webinar Premium and also just general Cvent registration. Doesn't look like we have any other questions on HubSpot for now. Should additional questions come in later, feel free to continuously add HubSpot questions to Q&A. I can always answer those questions in more of a text-based format. It does look like we actually have some more that just popped in. So I love the dedication. We showed registered and canceled. Can you integrate wait lists? Would love to learn a little bit more about the ask. So I might look to take this offline with whoever asked this specific question. Currently, we can't integrate wait lists within the connector. It is just more of a native feature within registration, but it is a good question and a good piece of feedback. Have another question from Erica. We use lead scoring in HubSpot. Would Cvent be able to sync with that particular model of HubSpot? In terms of lead scoring, Erica, if that's something that you all have built into your workflows, it is something that we could potentially incorporate, just because what we're really doing with the integration is writing a lot of this attendance, registration, cancellation data over to HubSpot directly. What you do with that data is up to you all. So through one of those workflows, if someone that is attended and is on one of those attended lists, based on their list enrollment, if we wanted to increase their lead score by a couple of points, something that you all can absolutely do. So it's possible with the connector because we're writing all of that information over. We would just need to do some additional work via workflows to accomplish that. All right. No other questions that I see coming in. With that being said, I can continue to answer in more of that text-based model via Q&A. But with that being said, I appreciate the time. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my colleague Ryan to start talking a little bit more about our Marketo integration.
Awesome. Great job, Jeremy. Real proud moment, probably a little bit more behind the curtain than you all need to know, but I used to be on the same team as Jeremy and love to see people really grow into their roles. And so very proud moment there. All right, back to the matters at hand. Marketo. So we have similarly, we call it an out-of-the-box integration with Marketo. And it allows us to connect the two systems, of course, and it's done in a very sort of simple way. So I'm actually going to, similar to what Jeremy showed, and actually let me stop sharing my screen for one moment, and I will reshare that. One moment, friends. Because I do want to walk you through how things connect, what data points will be mapped and sync with one another, what actions in Cvent will actually cause the integration to trigger information. And I should be able to do that and show you here. In 1 second. Apologies all. A little technical difficulties getting my screen share up and running. That should be here in a second. Let's see. There we go. Now you can see it. All right. So we are in the planner side of Cvent, right? And there is an area under the admin section called integrations. This is one of our push API integrations, meaning whenever an integration point fires, we're going to send data over. So how do we actually connect these two systems? It's a copy and paste sort of connection. So you'll be able to get the information like your REST endpoint, your identity, your client ID, and your client secret from Marketo. We have it in our guide on where you grab that information. We also have the ability to select this as sort of default, meaning every time you create a new event or create an event that has sessions, that the integration will automatically be enabled. Really, some of these run Popeel style set it and forget it type settings here at the admin level. One area I do want to call out is this record matching area. This is probably the number one question that we get when we're talking to customers about integrating Cvent with any other platform is, I have Cvent attendees. How are you matching them in this case with my Marketo leads? Our default setting is going to be email address, right? That's a unique identifier in Marketo as well as Cvent. But if for some reason you wanted to alter that, you can also do it by first name, last name, and email address, the combination of all three. But again, 95% of the time, I'd say email address is the way that we're matching Cvent attendees or contacts to Marketo leads. I mentioned that only particular actions are going to trigger an update of data between Cvent and Marketo. If this is a new term for you, integration points, that's exactly that action, right? So when this action happens, it triggers the sync of data. The most common ones we'll use are things like somebody registered or somebody is marked as a participant for the event or a particular session. If you're using Cvent emails, the fact that somebody opened the email, etc. You can add additional integration points. So, maybe if an email bounces, I want to take an action, or if somebody declines the Cvent invitation email, I want to take some sort of action. And the things that we can do are we can actually update a lead in Marketo. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, including updating custom objects, which is my favorite. And we'll talk about that again in a little bit more depth. We can also automatically add people to campaign or leads. Lead lists as certain action happens. This is a little bit dated. I don't quite suggest using this, but it is an option if you want to do that direct to campaign or direct to list feature. But I'll show you some more advanced ways that you can handle that same action of adding and removing people to campaigns or lists. So really the big things is we're going to update a lead whenever that integration point triggers, and we can also update custom objects for that particular lead. Last thing is, well, we know what's going to trigger the change. What's actually going to change? In any of those scenarios where we're triggering any of those integration points, you'll choose which fields you would like to map between systems. You can choose to map Cvent contact as well as registration data to Marketo lead object, so any lead field that may exist, and you're able to map those accordingly to those Cvent fields. Again, it's going to be Cvent contact fields, registration fields like registration type, admission item, registration date, etc. We can also sync lead capture fields if you're using Cvent lead capture, session data, event data, all of those fields can be mapped. But when we're talking about event and session data, that's where I really suggest using custom objects. So if you have access to custom objects on the Marketo side, I highly suggest creating a custom object to store both event data as well as session data. So that way, it becomes a, back to that set it and forget it idea. You don't have to pre-build lists. You don't have to pre-build campaigns. all you have to say is every time an event happens in Cvent, I have this particular event level custom object that's going to store who registered for what event, what status they're in, what date did those actions happen, did they participate or not, what was the name of the event. All of that can be stored in that custom object. And similarly, sessions, for those of you who may not be familiar with Cvent, sessions are the event within the event, right? So if you've gone to a large conference, you're familiar with the concepts, right? You have different breakout sessions. You can create another custom object to store that data. And as you can see here at the bottom of my list, you'll see that I can also map fields over to those custom objects. Sort of as a side note, you notice that I had to do a crazy amount of scrolling just as the product lead over this particular product. We are working to clean that up. So you don't have to see every single field, just the ones that you want to map. So a little sneak peek of what we're doing. Okay, so we looked at the Cvent side of this integration enough. We have an understanding of what triggers the integration and what fields can be changed or in what objects in Marketo. I want to take a moment and just sort of review all of that process again, right? Because it's really important to visually understand how the integration works. So let's take an example of an attendee registers for an event. So the Cvent attendee record is going to be synced over to Marketo, and we're going to try to match on email as the default. Is there a match? The happy path scenario is yes, there is a match, meaning there is a Marketo lead that already exists. We matched it on email, and what we'll do is we'll update any of those mapped lead fields. We'll also update any of those custom objects that you want us to sync. Again, think of that as event and session data. And we can also add somebody to a Marketo LaunchPoint program. So for those of you out there that have Marketo's webinar package and use LaunchPoint programs, for very simple Cvent events, we could do that same thing. I'll also show you that on the Marketo side. So somebody registers, then somebody cancels, or somebody is marked as a participant, right? Every time one of those actions are triggered in Cvent, that same workflow is going to happen where we're going to try to match on email. And if we find a match, great. And if we don't find a match, we will create a net new Marketo lead, inserting any of those mapped Cvent contact fields like name, email address, title, company, etc. And then do those same actions of updating the lead fields, writing custom object fields, and or adding them to a LaunchPoint program. So that's happening every single time one of those integration points trigger. And when we think about the event lifecycle, I think a lot of people, especially non-traditional sort of event producers who really know better, but they think of an event as being linear, right? You're going to invite somebody, they're going to register, maybe they'll choose some activities, right? They'll attend sessions, and then we're going to send them a feedback survey. I think we all really know that it's really more of a cycle, right? It starts and then recycles itself and starts all over at the next event or whatever the next sort of action that you're trying to drive. So thinking about that through how the integration works with Marketo, again, it's a little bit more complex than what our HubSpot integration does. So for example, you want to invite people, right? You have leads in Marketo. You know who are the best people based on lead score or other items, knowing what web pages they visited or emails they opened. You know who needs to go to this particular upcoming event. So in that case, you can actually use Cvent to populate tokens in Marketo, which would allow you to then use the Marketo emails to get people to register, right? So you've invested all that money in Marketo. You want your emails to go out of there. So our integration is bi-directional, right? So you'd be able to get the event data, use those tokens in emails, send out the invitations. When somebody opens that registration email, or invitation email, should I say, that you sent from Marketo, they'd actually be able to click on a register button and have any Marketo fields on their lead record pre-populate into the registration form. And this really is important because it can be fields that are visible to the registrant, right? Like their title, their company, their telephone number, gives them opportunity to correct those things. And then when they complete registration, update those fields in Marketo. It also can allow us to hide fields in Cvent, right? Maybe there is some sort of customer category field that allows you to determine what registration type, right? Maybe I have a VIP field in Marketo, and if VIP field equals yes, when they register for that event, I want them to be able to register for that event as a VIP. So not only is it real tangible ways that it helps an attendee register faster, it also allows you to categorize your Marketo leads and ensure they get the correct experience as they navigate through the registration. And then again, they'll register for sessions, they'll be marked as a participant. And all along this journey, as we're taking those same actions, it's helping feed Marketo so that you can better analyze who that person is, where they are in sort of their life cycle, driving them to whatever your intended outcome is, right? For maybe a corporate entity, it's them to buy a product or a service, renew a product or a service. If you're in the nonprofit space, maybe it's a fundraising goal or getting them to renew membership, right? We're feeding all of that data and then we're pushing that into essentially what is the next great event for them to attend. All right, so we talked about the theoretical enough. What does it look like to get your hands on it in Marketo? So first I want to start with those folks out there that use LaunchPoint. Again, LaunchPoint is going to be best for your webinars or your simpler events that don't have a lot of sessions. You can choose to create a new channel and service and point that to Cvent. It would open up an authentication process and you're simply putting in your Cvent credentials. And now this will create a LaunchPoint channel to store all of your Cvent data. And as you build programs, you'll be able to filter it for an individual event accordingly. So what I really think is most useful for our customers who have larger events is really creating those custom objects. So I'm within a lead record right now, just to show you that custom object. I created one for session registration and participation. You're able to determine the fields that you'd like to track. So I'm within a lead record for Ryan Costa here. That's me, of course. And you can see I have fields to know my session participation and registration status, the name of the session, when that action took place, what was the lead ID, what was the name of the session, etc. You just have to map those fields and they'll write here accordingly. So again, the two areas where we'll store or three areas, should I say, we can store the Cvent data is one, the LaunchPoint program, then it'll associate those leads to them accordingly. Two, we'll also sync them directly to the lead and update lead fields. And then three, custom objects that you create that you chose to sync to, and we'll map to those fields accordingly. We talked about being able to pull Cvent data as tokens. So here's an example of those tokens used to deliver an invitation email for a particular event. And as I mentioned, there's a special registration link that when they click on it, it'll actually insert the lead ID into the URL, and then any of those fields that are mapped over, like title, company, telephone number, etc., will appear in the registration form, both hidden and fields shown to the registrant. So we send out that particular invitation email. What happens when it returns, right? So I have this program and campaign that I've set up. And the way that we are looking at it is, let's say I want to create a smart list. And that smart list, I want to filter it for people who attended a specific session. So in this case, I'm saying, find me everyone who attended session A, or what did I call it? Global Smart Innovation Session, right? I've stored all that information as a custom object in Marketo. So all I'm doing is dragging and dropping all of those elements. I need somebody with a custom object and their status for participation is true for this particular session name. What's great about this is that I can also take information of non-event actions, right? I also want somebody who opened up an email for something, or they clicked on a link, right? You all that are working in Marketo, you understand how it works, right? You're able to take any of those actions that we're tracking for an individual lead, use it as filtering criteria, and ultimately schedule and trigger a flow. That flow can be updating a lead score. We talked about that with Hubspot, right? So maybe because they attended that session and they opened that email, I want to increase their lead score. Maybe I want to trigger the send of another email as soon as they meet that criteria. I want to create an interesting moment. Maybe you've got Marketo integrated in with Salesforce and you want them to be added to a campaign. Really, any of those flow actions that you can choose here on the right-hand side, you'd be able to find that right combination of event actions along with non-event actions and trigger those flows accordingly. So that's a sort of high-level overview, maybe a little bit more than high level, of what the Marketo integration does. I am going to take a peek at the questions and see what I can answer. All right. The current integration with Cvent Marketo does not support the functionality of transfers. If you transfer a registration to another lead, it does not create a new record in Marketo. Will this be added to the roadmap? That's a great question. It's certainly something that we want to investigate. That feature in Cvent is called substitution, so registration substitution. You're correct that it doesn't take that into account now. We are working with substitutions and getting it into integrations. We added it to our Salesforce integration, which my colleague Daniel will mention next. So we will look to cover more of those scenarios. Thank you for that question. And there's another question here that I think maybe we can answer at the end. In the interest of time, if you have any other Marketo questions, please add them into the Q&A. Sort of as a side note, the results from that poll that we took earlier looks like, as I expected, more people are here to talk about Salesforce, but we did have in according order Marketo and HubSpot, so makes sense. But Salesforce being number one, I don't want to bury the lead. So I'm going to yield the stage to my colleague Daniel to talk about how we integrate with Salesforce.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate that. And for everybody's knowledge, Ryan is our main product manager for the Salesforce app. So I hope I do this justice. So just quickly, my name is Daniel Godin. I am a manager of our technical consulting team. And what my team does is we help our customers with on the more complex end, navigating, designing, architecting, and building custom integrations, often directly with our APIs, and all the way over to helping our customers with out-of-the-box integrations like Marketo and HubSpot and Salesforce. So my focus today will be on Salesforce. I'll talk a little bit about kind of high level about it, but we're going to get into a bit more of a deep dive today with our remaining time. So the very first place we're going to start here is a common question me and my team get asked a lot is, and this applies to all of our integrations, do you support one-way or two-way integrations? The answer is it really depends on what you're trying to do. Both bring a lot of value for different use cases. So let's start with one-way. Now, when it comes to the Salesforce app, a big part of the Salesforce app is focused on getting data into Salesforce. This allows you to do things like visualize your event ROI, or who attended, or how much do they spend, or what are your attendees' journey through this event. And then you can use that information to drive sales and marketing programs, report on, transfer it over to other parts of your Salesforce environment. And the cool thing about the Salesforce app is it takes all this data that's locked in Cvent normally and makes it and opens it up to your non-Cvent users, provided they have access to Salesforce. Now, with a two-way integration, you can start to unlock additional value, but it can get a lot more sophisticated too. Not only can you update your Salesforce environment with Cvent data, you can start to update Cvent with your Salesforce data. One really important use case for anybody who sends emails out of any system is CAN spam, right? If you're in the US and around the world, you have different regulations around email. So that's email compliance. You have to track who's opted out of emails, right? So we capture that information in Cvent. You also capture that information in Salesforce. If Salesforce is your source of truth for that, you can sync that back to Cvent. And you can essentially update, you can update the entire Cvent contact record with your information in Salesforce. And I'll show you that in a second. Another thing is that, let's say you're an association or membership organization, right? You have different member types, different attendee types. So you can use data in Salesforce, such as your membership level, to drive a completely different registration experience for each of your types of members. So those are just a couple examples of the value of a two-way integration. Change my screen here. All right, there's actually a question that we got asked is, when do we go custom versus when do we go out of the box? And this kind of applies to not just the Salesforce app, but a lot of our out of the box integrations. So let's start on the complex end, right? Which my team deals a lot with custom API integrations. The great thing about custom API integrations, and this is when I say custom API integration, I mean you develop an integration from scratch. You're writing code, or you have a team that writes code, right? The big advantage is you own the integration. You can customize it as you see fit. You have full control over it. Disadvantage is you need a development team to build it, right? You also have to maintain it. And I've seen this situation, if your developers leave, and they leave with that knowledge, that could be a problem. Kind of in the middle ground here, Cvent has a service called Integration Hub. It's a middleware that we use internally to build integrations for our customers. And the big advantage is, again, we can do completely custom integrations here. We often use it to extend the functionality of the Cvent Salesforce app. So if we have customers that say, okay, well, love your Salesforce app, but we have a bunch of custom objects or custom packages in our Salesforce environment, and we want to get the data there, we can use Cvent Integration Hub to facilitate that and enhance the Cvent Salesforce app. And the great thing about it is Cvent owns and maintains that. So we have a pretty large team at Cvent that builds these integrations and maintains them. And that leads us to the Cvent Salesforce app. It's easiest to set up, easiest to maintain. You get new features immediately. Often just requires an app upgrade, which is a pretty seamless experience. Yeah, and Cvent is responsible for the complete maintenance, support, troubleshooting, and all that. So that's a huge advantage of out-of-the-box integrations. Which approach should you take? Well, when it comes to the Salesforce app, almost always recommend start with the app. It works for 80% of our customers. We have a great sales engineering team and a solutions consulting team that can work with you to figure out, if there's any gaps, and only really look at custom if the app really doesn't meet your needs. All right. So we're going to look today at the Salesforce app from the perspective of best practices. And this is kind of a high-level version of what my team runs our clients through. We get pretty rigorous with, Smartsheet and product plans and such. But here's kind of at a high level. If you're implementing the Salesforce app, here's what we recommend. Because honestly, Salesforce is a very complex system, right? It is so functional. It is so complex. What that means is any integration with Salesforce is also complex. It's important to plan carefully and take a systematic approach. So step one, get familiar with the Salesforce app. Skim the documentation. We have great documentation. There's a lot of information there. I'll even show it to you in a second. Skim the documentation, get the app installed in your environment. It's a managed package, only takes 5 to 10 minutes. And then take a look at the new objects it installs. Look at the new Cvent configuration that you have access to, but don't touch anything quite yet. At this point, you want to start with the plan, right? Always recommend designating somebody who's a kind of a project manager for the Salesforce app to interview your stakeholders, right? This could be Cvent users, Cvent planners, your Salesforce users, your Salesforce admins. Find out which each group wants to get out of the app and the integration. Write it down and get consensus and sign off from your stakeholders. That forms the basis of your plan and the requirements that you're trying to configure to, all right? And then start with the basic configuration. Look, it's a really flexible application. There's a ton of stuff to configure. You really just want to start with the basic stuff first. I'll show you this. It's the record matching criteria and the field mapping, and then stop and test, right? Don't get into the complex stuff first. Make sure the data flows one way first. Make sure there's no errors being thrown, and then continue to finish your integration. Actually, you could probably take this methodology to any of our out-of-the-box apps or any sort of integration that you're approaching, right? But it's especially important with our Salesforce app. All right, before I jump into showing you the app, let me switch my screen here. This is an important thing that I do see people get confused about, so it warrants its own slide. It's the record matching flow. So when data is flowing from Cvent into Salesforce, it takes a very specific flow, all right? The very first thing, we have some new attendees to sync. People register for events or get invited to events. The very first thing we do is we say, okay, has this person already matched the Salesforce record in the past, right? So that could be a contact or a lead. If they have matched previously, we add them as an attendee, and that's that. So it creates a little bit of stickiness to your Salesforce record. Once that's matched up, it continues to match, right? We do have some functionality, I think, coming down the pipeline that'll make that a little bit more flexible. But so there will be some additional configurability there too. Then what we do is we look up a contact and say, well, do you have an existing contact already for this person based on your record matching criteria? If a match is found, great, we'll use that contact and we'll add the attendee. If no match is found, we continue on. We look for a lead. All right, is a lead found? Yeah, sure. Okay, we found a lead that matches the lead lookup criteria, and we add that attendee into Salesforce. And only at the very end, if we can't find an existing match, we can't find a contact, we can't find a lead, we go into what's called our no match criteria, and then there's a few different actions you can take there. So I'm going to give you maybe a few seconds here just to let this marinate, because as you get into the app, and I know we have people who may be familiar with the app here and people who are just getting used to or looking to use the app, this is a really important thing to understand when you do onboard the app. So, all right. So now let's get into the app itself. Just going to take a little drink of water here. So this is the Salesforce app. Now, we're going to look at the Salesforce app from the perspective of best practices. Starting with, let's get familiar with the app. All right. There's a bunch of new stuff the app installs as part of the managed package. Cvent events you see at the top here. You see attendees. You see attendee activities, attendee temp records, contacts and leads we all know about already, right? Nominations, logs, Cvent survey programs. These are all new objects that get installed that can be configured. There's a lot there. So the very first thing is Cvent events. So this is a list of events in my environment, in my little test environment here. These events can be enabled one by one, so you can choose what to sync to Salesforce and what you don't want to sync to Salesforce, right? And if we dive into a specific event, far future event here, it is an active event. It is starting in 2025. That's why it's the far future event, right? We can see, actually, let me just dive into that event here. We can see our list of attendees and attendee activities and all those things linked to the event, the campaigns that are associated with this event, right? Tasks that are created related to this event. So there's a lot of information attached records here in the Cvent event. We have details of the event, right? The event code. We should have some event schedule, start and end time. So you kind of have this whole event snapshot right in your Salesforce environment now. And if we go back to related here and dive into the attendees, we have our list of attendees that have no response means they've been invited, but they haven't actually registered. Accepted means they've registered. So you have visibility now into who's registered for your event, right? And you can click into any of these attendees and get the specific attendee information. So this looks like it's me. I invited myself to this event. So I've accepted the registration, right? I selected the speaker registration ticket or admission item. So there's a whole bunch of information on the attendee now. So you can see where a lot of that information that was locked in Cvent before is now visible in your Salesforce environment to those people that you give access to, right? Here's a critical piece of information when we're talking about ROI, what's their total ordered amount, that they purchased or paid for within Cvent? Is there any balance due? And you can do some sophisticated stuff like create tasks if there's a balance due for people to fit your sales team to follow up on, or your accounts receivable to follow up on. And diving further into this, down the hierarchy of data here, we have attendee activities. And this is where you have a really good visual of the attendee journey within Cvent, right? Now, it's optional whether you sync attendee activities or not, but there's a lot of great data here that you can then use to drive your marketing and sales programs. So in this case, this attendee's registered for some sessions. You can see when emails are sent, when an attendee opens an email, if they've checked into an event, and there's a pretty long list of attendee activities that can be synced over, right? So those are kind of the objects we install in a nutshell. There's a bunch of other stuff, but that's kind of the main things you want to pay attention to. Jumping over to Cvent itself for a second, right? You saw the similar configuration for Marketo and Hubspot there, but if we go to under a specific event, under integrations, we have the configuration for the Salesforce app. And this does have to be enabled on a event by event basis. So I've said, yes, I want to sync this particular event to Salesforce. And you can set this up in your event template so it's automatically enabled, but it does give you control over that. You have things like your nomination settings, which is a bit more of a really complex events configuration. Invitation settings. This is where two-way kicks in. Do I want to allow my sales team or my Salesforce users to invite people to events, or at the very least, add them to an invitation list? You have kind of different levels of control there, right? Which invitation emails do I want to give them access to? So I can kind of select different emails that show up in the app. So I'm just going to call this invite to. I won't save it. Do I want to allow people in Salesforce to register for this event? Right. I'm not going to go into the deep dive. There's a bunch of stuff you can configure here, but kind of the moral of the story is you can set up in Salesforce the stuff you want to sync over. So this gives control to your event planners, what they want to sync into Salesforce. And then based on these configurations here, data will sync over to Salesforce. All right. Now, I think most of the people on the call here are probably marketers and such. But if we do have any techies in the audience and you're wondering what goes on underneath the hood for the Salesforce app, it is a set of custom objects, and I've kind of given you a glimpse of that, and Apex jobs. So these are like code within the Salesforce environment that runs on a cycle. And you can actually set that cycle for events, attendees, and survey respondents here. So in this case, I've set events to sync every hour, but you can go down to the, as low as 15-minute sync, right? Or as high as, I think probably a 24-hour sync or 12-hour sync, right? And the same goes with attendees. So you have some control of how frequently you want to sync that information. All right. So we talked before about record matching as one of the important things that you start with as part of your basic configuration, right? The reason we're focusing on this here is because it is an area where I do see some of our customers get stuck on. So the way this works is, first, when we have a new attendee in Cvent, we try to match it to a contact. Now, every attendee we sync to Salesforce has to match with either a contact or a lead. If we can't associate the two, we don't sync that attendee over. All's not lost, though. There is still a way, if there's no match, to kind of see where that is, and that's in the attendee temp records. It'll show you if there's no match. That's kind of a level 3 course. We're not going to touch that today. But it really is important to plan your matching criteria very carefully. And the reason is because if you're too specific, you're probably not going to match any records. And if you're too general, you're probably going to match too many records. So you really have to look at your data. How clean is your data? Look, in the unicorn situation where every contact and lead in your Salesforce environment has a unique email, and if it does, I give you all of my praise because that's very rare. In the event that you do have unique emails for everybody, you could match just based on email, right? Email is the primary identifier for attendees in Cvent. And if you have clean data in Salesforce, you can match it just on email. But more likely, you're going to have to include other criteria like check the email. If there's a match, also check first name or last name. Now, you got to be a bit careful because people can spell their first names a bit different too. Dan versus Daniel. And if they type it differently, you might not have a match. So, email last name is a good place to start. And then you can add on additional criteria for your specific needs. Same goes with leads, right? Generally, I see as contacts tend to be a bit more specific, leads a bit more general. Now, what happens if you have no match? You go into what's called a no match criteria, and you have a choice here. You can either create a lead, create a contact, so it'll create these new leads or contacts, and that'll associate the new attendee with it. Or you can do no action. I often see people accidentally leave it at no action, and then they wonder why their attendees don't sync over. And they all show up in attendee temp records, so they're still there. So you have to plan this carefully. What do you want to do if you don't find a match in your Salesforce environment? All right, so we're going to jump over to field mappings. This is where we get to decide what data flows into Salesforce. And I've kind of mapped 5 fields here: email, first name, nickname, last name, and opt-out I'll talk about it as well. But you can kind of select any number of fields you want to sync over. So these are a list of Cvent fields on the contact. You see there's a lot of information there, and on the attendee. There's a lot of data you can bring in from Cvent, right? And you can choose the Salesforce fields on the contact or on the lead mapping, on the lead that you want to map that to. You can start to update your Salesforce environment with the information in Cvent. What happens if, let's say, and I've seen this before, there's certain situations where you cannot overwrite your name or email in Salesforce, right? It's really important you don't because of some regulation or something. You can select the direction of sync. So let's say in that case, I may want to sync first name from Salesforce to Cvent, but not vice versa. The last name from Salesforce to Cvent, or not vice versa, right? So you can choose the direction. Or maybe you only want to sync it to Salesforce, but you don't want to update Cvent. You can go the other direction. So you have a lot of control here. A lot of control over the sync both ways, all right? Going back to the can spam thing, so if you are collecting opt-outs, if Salesforce is the source of truth for whether somebody is opted out of email, you can sync this back to Cvent, right? One way or two ways, Cvent to Salesforce, Salesforce to Cvent, so that the downstream system, let's say Cvent, has the latest information on whether a contact is opted out, and then Cvent will respect that opt-out and not email people who said, I don't want you to email, right? Cvent emails are also a great way to collect that. So if you're okay updating that in Salesforce, you can keep this two-way. And then if somebody receives a Cvent email and clicks opt out, I don't want to receive any more communication, you can update your Salesforce environment too. So there's a lot of power there of the two-way integration. All right, I kind of fast-tracked through some of this configuration here. It is complex, and we're really just scratching the surface. But once you have these two things configured, this is where I'd say stop, save it off. Go back to your configuration tab here. You can kind of run a manual sync here, sync that data, and then make sure it works. Because this is where you'll start getting errors if you haven't mapped things correctly. So one challenge I see is if you have field mappings, if there's required Salesforce fields and you do not map those required fields, and then you try to create, you try to sync somebody over or create a contact, it's going to fail. Salesforce will throw an error saying, hey, you're missing the required field. That's a really common issue. So once you got this set up, this is a place to stop, pause, test, and then go on with a more complex configuration. And I think we only have a couple minutes here. I'm going to try to wrap this up really quickly, but I do want to show you one of the most powerful things about the app here, and that's where we can link events to campaigns. So I have one campaign here for a future event. Just be a second to load this up because it is a Salesforce developer environment. So while that loads, I'll take a drink of water. So while this loads up, I'll just talk a little bit about it. This is where the two-way integration kicks in, right? So imagine that you have, for instance, your sales team reaching out to people, or you have your constituents filling out some sort of intake form online, right? You can use this to, let's say, build reports or build campaigns in Salesforce. So one example is we have customers who end up building a report based on people who filled out a form, and then you can use that report to essentially bulk add campaign members to a campaign. And once you have those campaign members on a campaign, right? And here I only have 13, but you could have hundreds, thousands. You can use this to really easily automate the sending of invites triggered right from Salesforce. So it gives the power of sending Cvent invitations to your Salesforce users. Should you want to do that, you have control over this. You have control over who you give access to or not. But it allows you to send invites in bulk. So if I don't specify any filters, I can just hit the invite button here, and anybody who's a campaign member connected to this event, let's say the far future event, I can select my invitation email, right? Remember when I was in Cvent, I selected the invitation emails I wanted to allow. And if I click send invitation, immediately in bulk, everybody who's a campaign member will get an invitation for this event, right? This can be configured to immediately send the invitation email, or to add them to a list and have your planner send it out later on. So you have that control, right? Now, how does this relate to two-way sync? Well, this is the thing that would trigger a two-way sync back to Cvent. So when we looked at that record or the field mapping, those fields that are mapped from Salesforce to Cvent, when we send out these invites, immediately you're going to update the Cvent address book with the latest Salesforce information, completing that two-way sync. All right. And the newest feature, and I really wouldn't want to let you go without talking about this, automated invitations. If you choose to enable this, you can make this even more automated so that when there is certain criteria that's hit, right? So I'm going to choose this linked event and the email. You can select certain criteria, and if that criteria is hit, it'll automatically send any campaign members added to this campaign. It'll automatically send them an invite without even need to do any manual intervention. So it's the next level of automation, right? And then I'm going to conclude this with a little bit of a snapshot of where the data can be really put to use. Here's a campaign that we have set up here. This is a configuration that actually has us create opportunities automatically using the Salesforce app for anybody who's paid an amount. So these are attendees that have registered for an event, have paid some sort of amount. There's an opportunity created for each of those. And now we can start to see the return on investment from this event, right? So this is all, opportunity data that's created from the app showing revenue from this particular event, right? So this is where you really get a lot of power in the data to analyze ROI. In this case, this is kind of a different view of it, where we've broken it up by company, so we can see what the spend is or the registration count per company, etc. All right, so you can see there's a lot to do with the app. It can be very powerful. It can be daunting, and that's where my team really comes in, because we have a pretty kind of rigorous project methodology where we help our customers deploy this app and configure a lot of these complex configurations that we haven't even touched today. So if you are interested in help with the app, you can talk to your account manager, and my team can help you out. This is really just scratching the surface of the app, right? There's a lot more we can configure, but at this point, I'll be here for hours if I want to hit everything. So we're going to cut it off here. I'm going to pass it back to Ryan, and he'll help wrap us up. I think Ryan might be on mute right now, so we're just gonna take a minute to get him off mute, and he'll be back with you in a second. In the meantime, I'm gonna see if there's any questions I can answer.
All right.
All right.
You guys hear me now?
Oh, Ryan, I was just getting into questions. Okay, I'll let you wrap it up, and then we'll get into some of the questions here.
All right. Yes. No, sorry about that. I was probably standing there talking like a dummy, and you couldn't even hear me. So if you, first question here, if you do a Salesforce app, how much time do we allow to get it installed and set up for use? I have not used it before and want to provide rough timing to a client. Great question. So that one's tough. I will say that the actual downloading of the app is minutes. It's the planning, and from that planning, doing the configuration is the difficult parts. So, have we had customers get it stood up in a day or in a couple hours? Absolutely, right? But they had their ducks in a row and they had a very simple use case. We also have customers that I think crossed Dan's desk, and he could probably elaborate if needed, that have very complex requirements, large enterprise organizations that need to take into account all of the moving parts of their enterprise organization, and installing the app could take months, right? So I know that's not probably a straightforward answer, but I can suggest that if you plan and you discuss with all of the stakeholders as much as possible in terms of what the integration should do, what data is important to you, the more planning you do, the faster it is to get it stood up.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, Ryan, right? It can vary a lot. The very first question, like I get that question when we start projects. And my question back is, a big part of it depends on how available and how experienced your Salesforce admin is, right? Because ultimately they control the environment, right? And I'm sure there's people on the line here who have very rigorous change management processes with Salesforce. They'll have like 3 or 4 different Salesforce environments that they have to kind of bring the configuration up through. And in that case, it can take months just because of internal processes. The app could be simple to install. It's usually internal processes that slow things down.
Great. All right, next question here. Can we create internal questions and answers that become part of the integration data from Cvent to Salesforce? On the Cvent side, Mimi, that's asking this question, we do sync Cvent registration questions and internal information. So those are specific fields that you can create on the Cvent end if it is information that your planners will either add to an attendee record, or if it's information that you're collecting from attendees. If these are questions or answers that a planner wouldn't be updating for internal purposes, then that might need to be completed in another way. Certainly, if it's not part of the app, we can figure out a way to get that data out of Cvent and or in Salesforce mixed in with the app data. All right. Next question. Can you please provide examples? This is the question I was answering silently when my headphone was on mute earlier. So can you please provide examples of when a custom versus out-of-the-box integration is required? So, I think there's just some clarification we should do here. An out-of-the-box integration, this is something that's off the shelf. It's click and configure, right? It doesn't require you to be any type of developer or have any type of development background. You really should just be able to follow a guide and configure the integration yourself. Versus a custom integration, as Dan mentioned earlier, that's going to require using the API and or other tools to extract the exact data that you want and place it in very specific objects and fields in the target system. So, the easiest way to answer that question is all of our out-of-the-box integrations being click and configure. It means that it comes with a specific set of features. Those particular features, you can use all of them, you can use some of them, but you are limited as to what features are included in that box, if you want to think about it that way. So you would use a custom integration when you are finding that the tools that are provided to you in this off-the-shelf or out-of-the-box solution are lacking, right? We build our out-of-the-box integrations to accommodate roughly 80% of the use cases that we hear from our customers in terms of what data is important and what's not. And then you may have some customers who have more advanced needs. And when you have more advanced needs, we'll absolutely be able to integrate the data just using a custom integration to complement. Anything to add there, Jeremy or Dan? All right. Last question here. You offer integration to Salesforce, but do you offer integration to Viva? We do have a Viva integration. You might be a little bit more familiar with it than I am, Dan, but from my knowledge, this is actually a Viva integration that we partner with them on. Yes.
So I'll actually take this because things have shifted a little bit recently. We had an out-of-the-box Viva integration. Actually, Viva had an out-of-the-box integration with us. So sometimes you'll have an integration that's built by one company or the other in the partnership, right? And they tend to own it. The reason I say we had is because what we found was when you have an out-of-the-box, well, specifically the Viva integration, it solved one specific use case, but Viva can be even more varied than Salesforce when it comes to different workflows, right? This really is targeted to our life sciences clients on the line, so we do have you. Hope you perk your ears up. What we found is much more effective is using our integration hub middleware to build custom integrations that are built and owned by Cvent. So it's allowed us to build an integration that really does suit your specific implementation of Viva, right? And we found that's a much more effective way. Viva is just a really hard system to out of the box. So we found that custom achieves what our customers need a lot more effectively. All right.
All right, I think we got through all of the questions, and we'll be sure to also put written responses in there for all of you that maybe come back and watch this later. And with that, I think we're getting here towards the end. I do want to give a quick reminder to you all out there that if you still have questions, feel free to still type them in. We'll get them as long as the questions are still open. Also, we want to make sure that we're getting better at this, right? So if you would fill out the feedback survey simply by clicking on that survey button on the right-hand panel and let us know what went great and what didn't go so great, and we'll work on that. Lastly, we've got some other webinars that are coming up, right? Not just about integrations, but other topics that would be important to event producers and other stakeholders that get involved with events. My colleagues will put the link to that in the chat. So if you would, friends out there, go ahead and add the links to the chat, and you can click on chat and find the links to those. And with that, this is just the beginning of our integrations webinar series. We want to expand. We want to learn more what's important to you. So we'll continue to have new webinars on integrations. We also have a YouTube channel that you can check out and get quick hit best practices on much smaller topics. We hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us. On behalf of all of us here, thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next one.